So when you think of rum, you should think of the islands off of Florida down in the Caribbean. And what they would do is they would take sugar cane, melt it down, and that would give them molasses. They'd take the molasses and use that in the fermentation process, and then that's how they would flavor their rum. The regular rum market is dominated by Bacardi. Now there's clear Bacardi, añejo Bacardi, and there's also gold Bacardi. So what's the difference? Alcohols, when they're made, are completely clear. There's no color to anything. So alcohols can get colors two ways. One, artificially, with food coloring added to it, or the second way is naturally being aged, añejo, aged in wooden barrels. How do you tell the difference? Usually it'll mention some sort of difference on the bottle, aged, years old. If it just says gold, then it's fake gold, meaning it's just food coloring put in there. Then there's coconut rum. Coconut rum world dominated by Malibu. But they also have competition with Captain Morgan's Parrot Bay. So both of these are coconut flavored rums. Then there is, of course, spiced rum. Captain Morgan. This is a favorite of a lot of people. So this is pumpkin pie flavored rum. That was literally the flavors. Cinnamon, nutmeg, that they went after. This is pumpkin pie flavored rum. Good stuff. You're going to sell lots of it. So our main brand of American whiskey is, of course, Jack Daniels. So Jack Daniels, this was started over 100 years ago in Lynchburg, Tennessee. Jack makes a couple other ones, like the Gentleman Jack. This is one called a single barrel. So a little bit different than like the private stock, private reserve, single malt type stuff. Single barrels, what this is they'll take the Jack Daniels blend and they'll put it in brand new barrels. Because when they age alcohol, they'll use the wooden barrels for a couple of generations before they throw it out. And each successive generation, there's less colors and flavors sinking into the alcohol from the wood. So when a barrel is brand new, that's what's going to have its most flavors and colors coming out of the wood going into the alcohols. So single barrel just means that it's a brand new batch of barrels that were used to age this whiskey. So it's very intense flavors of oak and wood, and people love that stuff, so they're willing to pay for that. So after whiskey, another close relative is bourbon. So bourbon is a type of whiskey. It's corn whiskey. So it's made in Bourbon, Kentucky. It has to have at least 51% corn in that original flavoring process. And then they will age their bourbon in burnt oak barrels. So they'll take oak barrels and they'll burn the inside of them intentionally. And this gives it a nice, unique, smoky characteristic that people like. With Irish whiskeys, you're basically going to have two options in your bar most of the time. You're going to have Bushmills and you're going to have Jamesons. Now, Irish whiskeys and Scottish whiskeys are similar in how they're made because they're both made with malted barleys. Basically, the difference in the flavor characteristics is that Irish whiskeys, when they're in the malting process with their barley, they won't let the smoke from the peat fires touch the grains. And then it goes through a process in the aging that's called a sherry maturation, which just means that they borrow their barrels when they age their whiskey. So they'll take wine manufacturers, their old barrels, they'll take whiskey or bourbon manufacturers, they'll take their old barrels, and then they age their Irish whiskey in those barrels. And it gives it borrowed unique characteristics from those other alcohols blended in to their Irish whiskey. So basically everything you need to know about Scotch we can learn from Mr. Johnny Walker here. So this is the whole Walker lineup. Most Scotch manufacturers will make their Scotches in similar aged increments to these guys. So they'll have one that's a short to no aged. They'll have an 11 or 12 year bottle. Then they will have a 15 to 16 year bottle. They'll have an 18 to 20 and then a 20 plus. So the number on the front of a Scotch bottle tells you how old that Scotch is. It tells you how long it's been sitting in a wood barrel before it gets shipped over here and sold. So Scotch is also made with a malted barley, but it's a little bit different than the Irish whiskey because what they do with Scotch is they let the smoke from the peat fires that are drying out the barley, they let the smoke touch those barley grains, so it gives it kind of a smoky characteristic. Whereas with Irish whiskey, they don't let the smoke touch the barley. Basically, this is smoked malted barley, whereas Irish whiskey is just regular malted barley. So first one we have is the red label. This is just their basic, cheap, low-end Scotch. They claim that it's aged, but you can't look it up. Next, you have your black label, which this stuff has been aged for 12 years. Then you'll have your 15 to 16 year range. In Johnny Walker, the green label. Then we have gold label. So gold label, this has been sitting in a barrel for 18 years. Then the flagship of Johnny Walker's brand is blue label. Blue label, this has been sitting in a barrel for 25 years before it's bottled and shipped over to us. And I don't really drink Scotch, but this is definitely where I'd like to start. Scotches can also be blends or they can be single malts. Johnny Walker is a blend. That means that they kind of blend their batches together to just keep a consistent flavor. Single malt means there are special, unique batches that are made every single year. So Johnny Walker, this is a blended Scotch. These are some other common blended Scotch whiskeys. You have Chivas, and then you have Buchanan's. Then these are some single malt Scotches. So these guys, they make special unique batches every single year, and they're not blending together their stuff. So it carries characteristics from those specific batches. So common ones, Glenlivet, then Glenfiddich, Macallan's. So make sure when you go into your bar that you know what your best single malt Scotch is, because you'll have Scotch drinkers that will come in and say, give me your best single malt Scotch. That just means whatever your single malt Scotch you have that has the highest number or is the oldest. Next, let's talk about brandies and cognacs. So brandy is basically distilled wine. So another way to say that is if I could take this bottle of wine, drill a hole, and just suck out the alcohol, that would be brandy. So the quality of the brandy is very much subject to the quality of wine that it's made from. There was a region in France that was known for many, many years for making really good brandy. So cognac is a region in France. So people started to specifically request brandy from Cognac, France. Cognac is brandy. It's just brandy that's made in Cognac, France. So there's three distinct categories with brandies and cognacs. There's the bottom shelf, VS. So VS stands for very special or very superior. These are VS cognacs. This is Hennessy and Cavassier. I'm sure you're familiar with these names. Then there's the middle shelf with cognac, which is VSOP. So very special or very superior, old pale, older pale in color. This VSOP just means that they're aging the VS longer, so it's very special, old pale. And then there's the XO, which stands for extra old or extraordinary. This stuff sits in a barrel for 25 years before it's bottled and shipped over and sold to us for usually about $200 a bottle. So Remy Martin Fine Champagne Cognac. Remy Martin has put themselves on the map as the premier cognac maker in the world. It says Fine Champagne Cognac? What? Fine Champagne Cognac? Oh shit, man. This is the good stuff. These guys are uniquely located in Cognac, France, right next door to Champagne. So one day at the factory, somebody got the genius idea. Here's what we're going to do. We'll go across the street, we'll grab Champagne grapes. Come back to our house, we'll make wine from those grapes and then brandy from that wine. So we'll call it Fine Champagne Cognac. Genius. This is just brandy. And cognacs can get ridiculous. They also make a Louis series, they make a Remy, Louis the 13th, and it comes in a hand-blown crystal glass bottle that looks kind of like this, but there's little kind of like spear tips on the end of this thing, and there's this big crown top that fits on there. I've seen it go as cheap as like $1,500 a bottle, but usually it's around that $1,800 to like $2,000 for a bottle about that size. They make a Louis Black Pearl. So Remy Martin makes a Louis series Black Pearl edition. The price tag on a bottle of Louis Black Pearl is $50,000. Yes, $50,000. So these are for the Bill Gates and the royalties of the world, the people that run the oil countries. Those are the guys that were scratching to get this stuff. Probably not going to see this in a bar. The only place that I've ever heard has this is in Vegas. If you go to the Wynn Hotel, they have a club called Trist, and in Trist they have a bottle of Louis Black Pearl. They actually have a cocktail that they sell with this stuff, that they make it with the Louis Black Pearl cognac, and that cocktail alone has a $10,000 price tag. Next one that we'll talk about, my absolute personal favorite, tequila. This stuff is made down in Mexico with the blue agave. So there's a couple of various distinctions with tequilas. Basically, most tequila manufacturers make all these different types of tequila. So they'll make a blanco, which means clear or white, it's not aged at all, or they can make a reposado, which means rested, so it's aged in between 2 and 12 months, usually right around that 6th month mark, or it can be an añejo, which is aged past 12 months, or it can just be gold, which usually just means it's gold food coloring added to it. Here's an example of some white or silver or clear tequilas. Blanco, which means white, plata, which means silver, silver, which means silver. Okay, these are clear tequilas. So just because they're not aged or just because there's no color doesn't mean that it's not a good tequila. They can be distilled multiple times and then they're going to be quality alcohol. And the first step in the aging process for a tequila is called a reposado. Me personally, I like reposados. These are my favorites to make margaritas with. I personally think that these make the best margaritas because the silver tequilas, they can have a little bit too much of a agave fruity bite. And then the añejos that are aged longer than these can sometimes have smoky, woody characteristics that will come in. These tend to make the smoothest margaritas. Just my personal preference. Then, of course, you can go past the 12-month mark in the aging of tequila. And once it goes past 12 months, it now becomes an añejo. So these guys are going to be a little bit smoother because they've been aged longer. They're going to be a little bit thicker because they're older. They're going to have a little more flavors and colors coming out of the wood into their tequila. These are my personal favorites when I'm just sipping on a tequila. If I want to have a nice tequila that I'm just going to sip maybe over the ice with a squeeze of lime and that's about it, then I'm going to go for an añejo tequila. There is, of course, gold tequila. So gold tequila just means fake gold because it's not getting its color naturally from the aging process because then it would either be called a reposado or an añejo. So if a tequila says gold, that usually just means fake gold, meaning that it's just food coloring. There's your basic lesson for what's in the bottle. So this is more than enough information that you're probably ever going to need as a bartender. We'll see you next time.